Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be talking to you about 5 common financial shadows that keep people struggling with money. All right, so this video is about 5 different shadow dynamics, so dynamics going on in the unconscious that keep people struggling with money. Now, this is coming from a more individualistic perspective where, let's say if a person has, let's say, certain money issues that are arising in their life because there are, let's say, certain mindset blocks or, certain patterns that they go through that, let's say, create problems with money. So what I would say is that this is far more about individual shadows than it is about collective shadows relative to money. I might do a collective shadows about money kind of thing, but this one is specifically meant for individuals in order to, let's say, create kind of an internal sort of shift in order to, let's say, make it easier to make money and then also to save money as well. So that's just a caveat that I would mention. Now, with this, oftentimes we will adopt certain mindsets about money that come from, let's say, our family, and oftentimes these can sort of play out and keep you in a kind of financial holding place. And so oftentimes it'll make it difficult for you to really feel a sense of, let's say, security and stability when it comes to money. And it can also keep you, let's say, insulated from certain opportunities that might come up that might help you make more money, or it might lead you into patterns where you might be more prone to spend money. So one of the things that I want to mention before I get into the meat of the video is that oftentimes our relationship with money really has to do with our relationship with what money actually is a stand-in for, what money represents. So money basically represents a few different things. So money represents power. It also represents freedom, and it represents survival. So basically our survival tendencies are about being able to have the resources that we need in order to survive. And so when it comes to, let's say, out in the wild, the way that animals survive, their tendencies, have to do with their ability to be here and, their ability to kind of push back on the forces of nature and to be able to, let's say, survive their environment, essentially. Now, with human beings, our survival drives get sublimated up through society. And the way that that currently works is, through, let's say the making money and through spending money to, let's say, have our basic needs met, to be able to have food and shelter and the things that we need and the things that we want. And so basically, when it's the case that we have some kind of internal issue with money, oftentimes it's that we have some kind of internal issue when it comes to, let's say, our ability to be here, our ability to take up space, our ability to, let's say, feel like our existence is valid, so that's sort of on the more survival element. But then when it comes to freedom and power, our relationship to money also has a lot to do with our relationship to our own power and our relationship to our ability to go toward what it is that we want and to have that sense of autonomy and freedom. So with all that in mind, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 common financial shadows, sort of dynamics that are going on in the unconscious of the psyche that keep you from being able to make money and keep you from being able to save and to have money and to feel like you're on good terms with regard to your survival and also your power and your freedom. Now, the first financial shadow that I'm going to be talking about is the tendency to identify with struggle as an identity of goodness. Now, oftentimes this can come up with a person who has dealt with struggle at some point in time in their life. So it can come up let's say if a person, let's say, didn't have a lot in school, but maybe they were able to take ownership of the fact that they, had the ability to do difficult things and to struggle and to make things work out. So one of the things that I've experienced is that, once I got into my teen years, I was kind of in the working class kind of zone. When I was a kid, I was middle class, but as a teen, working class. And then when I got to be about 20, I was really in this constant cycle of poverty. And I was in that state for, probably, I think, about 9 years. And then I eventually got back up to being middle class again. And basically during that time when I was struggling, one of the ways that I would, almost like look at the bright side of things and that I would see things as positive is I would, kind of say that, almost like having less or having to struggle actually leads to a kind of strength of character. And in some ways, there are things that you learn through struggling that maybe you wouldn't be able to learn otherwise. But what I found is that I was really creating this identity, like, to kind of boost my self-esteem, where it's like, oh, I'm the person who can go through any struggle and I can be the resilient one and I'm not spoiled at all and I can, and basically it's like this building this identity out of, let's say, struggle that kind of creates this kind of self-esteem boost. And so oftentimes if a person is, let's say, has gone through a period of time, or let's say has gone through their whole entire life dealing with financial struggle, they start to, let's say, create identities of struggle where they see struggle as being, let's say, a prerequisite for being, let's say, for being wise or for being good or to having some kind of strength of character. And so sometimes it can be the case that even if that person consciously wants to do better financially or consciously wants to not be struggling with money, there could be like this tendency to sort of, let's say, unconsciously avoid certain opportunities to make more money, or, this tendency to position themselves in a way where they would constantly be struggling because the struggle is the way that they maintain that sense of identity. So holding on to the identity of struggle and the identity of goodness through struggle or strength of character through struggle can be something of a pattern that basically creates no space for financial freedom to kind of come into play. And it can even, let's say, create sort of unconscious self-sabotaging mechanisms when a person has opportunities to, let's say, make more money. And so it tends to be that with this pattern of, let's say, identifying with goodness through struggle, it tends to keep a person in a kind of holding pattern where they always have to be struggling with money in some kind of way. And even if that person starts to make more money, and let's say they get a better job, oftentimes they will still bring about the struggle for themselves through getting into debt and through other types of things. And so that person can really still end up in this space where they're almost have to verify to themselves, see, I'm still struggling and I'm still a strong person, or see, I'm still struggling and therefore I'm a good person. And so in order to resolve this issue, one of the things that's important to become aware of is when we've crafted an identity out of struggle, and to be able to, let's say, relinquish that identity. We also want to be able to drop any judgments of people who are kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum. So I know that within, let's say, my identity of struggle, I would look at somebody who would be let's say, maybe somebody who hasn't struggled financially in their life, and there might be a kind of judgment there. I remember, back when I was maybe a teenager or so, this is when Paris Hilton was really, really popular and that sort of thing. And so I had this really strong judgment, it's oh, she has all this money and she doesn't even do anything, and and it was the idea that this is kind of that, her lack of struggle has kind of spoiled her and made her into some morally weak person. Of course, I don't know Paris Hilton from the next person. I'm not saying this is true. This is just what I was thinking when I was a teenager. And so basically, in order to, let's say, reverse the identity of struggle that I had built for myself, it's kind of it's almost having to drop resistance to what Paris Hilton represented to me, and being able to be willing to be seen in that light, and to be willing to embrace my own internal Paris Hilton doing nothing and it being fine to make money. There's also this idea of money as being something that we earn or deserve, that I'll talk about a little bit later in the video. But basically that was part of it as well. It's okay, well, if you have money, you have to work really, really hard for it, and that will justify it. But if you didn't work for it, then, then the money is not good because you didn't have to struggle. And so, but basically this one is all about the attachment to struggle and the identity of struggle, meaning that, oh, if I struggle, I am good. If I struggle, I have a strength of character. If I have struggle, I am wise. And so being willing to relinquish that identity and deconstruct that identity is something that's very, very important to get rid of if we want to open ourselves up to, experiencing well-being and experiencing stability when it comes to our finances. All right, so the next financial shadow that I'm going to be talking about is the tendency to feel like we have a duty to struggle with other people who are struggling, like let's say in our family. So let's say if, for example, I was raised in a really, let's say, a very communally based environment. And let's say that everybody in that environment was let's say dealing with the same kinds of financial struggles. And so what would happen is whenever that would happen, there would be a kind of let's say cohesion and closeness that would come about whenever, let's say, people had to kind of work together and band together to deal with scarcity. And so if, let's say, that's been going on for enough generations within a particular family of origin or community of origin, sometimes it can be the case where it's a person unconsciously has a tendency to almost associate scarcity with connection. And so when scarcity is associated with connection, sometimes we'll feel either consciously or unconsciously like we have a duty to struggle with others. So it's the case that, if other people are struggling, we have to struggle too, even if us struggling isn't actually going to help the other people out at all. Or we'll have this sense of struggle equals connection. And so we're going to try to connect to the feeling of struggle to connect to other people who are also on that same emotional wavelength. So it's basically like trying to tap into the wavelength of struggle as a medium through which to get connection. And like I said, there can be different generational patterns that lead to the solidification of this dynamic, and it can be going on totally underneath the surface of consciousness. And so what's really important when it comes to, let's say, being able to, let's say, be willing to kind of step out of the cycle or step out of the wavelength of struggle and of scarcity and into a wavelength of abundance, is to be able to, let's say, make connections with people who already are, fairly abundant, or who don't have a tendency to connect through struggle, but, connect through some other type of medium. Now, that's not as to say that you have to break connection with anybody who does tend to connect through struggle and that sort of thing. It's just that you have to have some kind of contrast there. So being able to, let's say, have connection in some other type of context can be quite helpful for stepping out of that zone. Also, you'll want to watch for any feelings of duty that you might have. So if it's the case that, let's say, your tendency is to think about your place being playing a certain role within a collective, and that your duty to that collective is to be on the same wavelength. Being willing to diverge, whenever actually things aren't going to serve the greater good is actually helpful here. So individuation is part of the process of being able to get your individual ego to go separate from, let's say, the collective ego of the community or family or whatever collectives that you happen to belong to. And so whenever there are underlying dynamics of, I have to struggle together with the group, or I have to do everything that the group is doing, oftentimes that means orienting to money and finances and survival in the same way that the group does. And so being willing to, let's say, take a step toward greater individuation and to step into your own energy and your ability to kind of travel to the beat of your own drum is very necessary. And a good intermediary step is to have people who are maybe more individualistically oriented as friends, or to find friendship groups with people who don't connect through struggle. And so this is something that, to kind of be aware of, because oftentimes it can be sort of an unspoken, kind of, let's say, underneath the surface kind of thing that's happening, like a kind of pattern that, everybody might be consciously engaging in without realizing it. And so a big part of it is becoming aware of being in that cycle in the first place, and being willing to find ways to step into your own energy in order to, let's say, move in a different direction than, let's say, whatever collectives you belong to are going into. All right, so the next financial shadow dynamic is that of limiting beliefs. So basically, when we are, let's say, raised in a particular family or a particular community, oftentimes there can be certain limiting beliefs about money that are instilled into us. And this can be instilled in an overt way, or it can be, instilled in more subtle ways. And so let's say a common one would be something like, oh, money doesn't grow on trees. Or even the notion that you have to work hard to make money. The harder you work, the more money that you make. That can also be another one. Let's say another one could be something like money is the root of all evil. And so what you want to do with this case is you want to look at what all your viewpoints about money are, like the way that you might tend to conceptualize of money and what it is, what types of things that you might have a tendency to project upon money, and basically all of the different, maybe conscious and unconscious beliefs that you might have. You want to make all of that conscious and write it down on a piece of paper. And then what you want to do is you want to start questioning as to where those beliefs came from and whether or not those beliefs are true. And if so, if they're true to some extent, what are the extents to which they're not true? And you want to be able to, look at money in, let's say, a more expansive way and to create, let's say, more open beliefs about money. And so basically one way that I like to look at money that I find, let's say, that's a bit more, let's say, holistic in a way, is to think about money as kind of is just essentially a medium of exchange. It's a way to make trade more easy. And so basically it's a way to trade value, between individuals. And so in a sense, like before, let's say the initial days of when commerce first arose, it's like, okay, I have 2 apples and I'll trade my 2 apples for your 2 oranges. Well, if I'm in that situation, what if the person doesn't want apples? What if they have enough apples and then I don't have anything through which to actually purchase the oranges that they actually value? And so money is basically a stand-in for goods and services that basically can be traded between people to essentially trade value for value, but it gives a neutral currency through which to do that. And so when I look at, let's say, money in terms of it just being an invention as a stand-in for value itself, then it's like I can look at money in terms of what is my relationship between myself and valuation as a concept. So it's kind of like looking at things through that lens and kind of taking away all the other associations from it. Now, another perspective that I had heard about money that was quite interesting is to kind of think about money as almost like energy, so it's sort of like energy can flow to one area or not. And, I tend to like the imagery, but I guess I tend to look at, let's say, if I look at money, it's a way of essentially you are able to trade value for value, and it ends up creating more value if, let's say, things go through a certain way. So for example, if I spend $1 and I buy a candy bar, it's like I get the value of eating the candy bar, and then the person who gets that $1 is somebody who's able to spend that same $1 on something else that they enjoy, and they get that value. And so basically that $1 can change hands a variety of different times. And with the changing of hands of that $1, everybody can have their own experience of value just with that $1. And so it's being able to almost see the value that money can provide as something that's not so fixed or finite, but that's something that has to do with, let's say, how individuals experience money. Now, when it comes to, let's say, gaining a broader paradigm about money and being able to look past certain limiting beliefs, we have to be willing also to look at the, let's say, the more shadowy side of money. We have to be very realistic about that. But we have to, in a sense, take a more neutral stance where we recognize, let's say, the way that money can be used in positive ways, where we also recognize how, let's say, poverty impacts people and that sort of thing. And so basically what we want to do is we want to be able to hold space for our awareness of the negative side of money and to be able to accept it as a whole thing. If we don't accept it as a whole thing, then we're going to be looking at things only through the lens of what is negative about it, and it's going to create an internal block relative to it, and we're going to have a weird relationship to it. Whereas if we're able to recognize money as something that has both let's say a positive side and a negative side, then what happens is we don't come into as much friction when it comes to our ability to make money and have money and that sort of thing, which again is a stand-in for our ability to have power, freedom, and survival. And so sometimes if we go into resistance to money itself, oftentimes we go into resistance to our power, our freedom, and our survival, and it creates a lot of issues in that sense. And so being able to recognize what's true about money in the positive and the negative sense without, let's say, having it be something that creates an overall resistance, and to understand, let's say, the function that money currently plays in our system, without adding extra things, can be very, very helpful for dropping blocks and resistances to money. So with all that in mind, when it comes to limiting beliefs about money, write down all of your limiting beliefs, vet them out to see what elements are true and which elements are untrue, and then find out if you have any, like, let's say, tendencies to grasp towards certain things or to have aversion toward other things, and then to be able to let go of that sense of grasping and aversion and to accept money as just something that is. All right, the fourth financial shadow that I'll be talking about has to do with the beliefs a person has about fortune and misfortune. So basically, if somebody has a belief that's like, okay, that which goes up has to come down. So if I experience a positive thing over here, then some other negative thing has to happen as well to kind of even things out. Now, this viewpoint can come from a variety of different situations. So maybe it's the case that that person was told that by their parents, or maybe they just so happen to have a lot of negative experiences that have come, after experiencing something positive. Or another pattern can be like, let's say if a person is experiencing joy in childhood, sometimes, let's say if parents, let's say, feel a sense of misery, oftentimes the parents will either consciously or unconsciously try to bring the child down into their state of misery, especially when they see the child happy. And so if the child has experienced being blindsided or brought down into misery from a state of happiness, then what's going to happen is they might become quite hypervigilant and start to think, okay, if something good happened, that means this is always the backdrop for something worse to happen, something bad to happen. And so what can happen is that that person might come into resistance to fortune itself, because it's this thought that, oh, when you are experiencing good fortune, you're a sitting duck. It means that you're just in waiting for something negative to happen again to kind of even things out. And so basically when a person has this type of belief, it can be something that not only creates a block and a barrier to financial success, but toward, good fortune in general and positivity in general. And there was also, I worked with somebody, at one point in time where they had the idea that, like, the world, is inherently like, a not a nice place. And so if they experienced something fortunate, that means that like two things would have to happen that were unfortunate. And so basically a lot of times people's experiences can, let's say, have certain misfortunes in them, and it can sort of shape their ability to be receptive to positivity or, good things happening to them in general. And so if there is, let's say, some kind of a block, to, let's say, good fortune, then ultimately money is a stand-in for fortune. Money is basically, it's the medium through which we can experience, let's say, prosperity. And so basically, when it comes to this, like, a person would have to be able to work through where those beliefs come from around, let's say, fortune and misfortune always coming in equal measure, or there always being more misfortune than fortune. And to be able to, get themselves into a standpoint where they can conceptualize of just positivity that doesn't require negativity to come in and even it out. So being, let's say, willing to, let's say, entertain the notion that there can be just pure positivity. And then also, when it comes to, let's say, these beliefs are oftentimes meant to keep them safe. So it's meant to keep them on guard so they don't get blindsided by some negative negative thing coming in from left field. And so being able to face with, like, let's say whatever it is that that person would be afraid of coming in from left field would be important. So let's say it's the case that I had mentioned before, where it's like the parents, like whenever they saw the child being happy, they would try to bring the child down into misery, and by yelling at them, or, you know, let's say scolding them in some kind of way. And so it's almost like whenever they experience something positive, they're kind of operant conditioned into expecting being yelled at or being brought down in some way. And so being able to face with, let's say, the traumas around being yelled at, around being scolded, around being brought down, that would be necessary in order for them to feel like they're not kind of going to experience that again. Because if those emotions from those experiences are still in the nervous system, haven't been processed through, then we're going to be extra on guard and trying to keep those experiences at bay. All right, and the final financial shadow that I'm going to be talking about is that there tends to be a shame dynamic and a paradigm of deserving versus not deserving. And this one is very, very common. So basically, if we have learned that, you know, nobody gets a free lunch here, you know, you have to earn your keep, you have to, let's say, if you don't earn your keep, you don't get to be here, you know, this type of thing, then really it's an issue with our own sense of being and our own sense of existential validity. And this is where shame comes from, essentially. It's this sense that, oh, do I get to exist here? And then applying some kind of condition upon which we have to meet in order to validate our existence. Like, it's as to say, oh, my life and my existence is only valid if I earn my place here, or if I have this quality or that quality, or I work for it, or something like that. But ultimately, at the deepest level, everybody's being is unshakably valid, regardless of what we do and what we don't do. And so there's no sense of having to earn our place in the universe. We already have that here. It's already a given. And so whenever it's the case that we learn that we have to earn our validity, you know, we have to become some particular way in order to be valid, or we have to reject certain parts of ourselves to be valid, what happens is this, like, kind of calls into question our own existential validity, and we start to experience shame. And with that shame, we start to feel like we don't deserve good things unless we are hitting some kind of bar of deserving. And so what ends up happening is a person tries to find a variety of different ways to, let's say, prove their worth, prove their existence in some way as valid. And so what they might do is they might say, oh, well, I'm a really, really hard worker, and because of that, then I deserve to exist. Or I, you know, have this value to provide here, and therefore I deserve to exist. But the reality is that deserving isn't actually a real thing. You know, ultimately, there's no such thing as deserving something or not deserving something. It's an idea that human beings create, and maybe we apply it in certain practical contexts. But when it comes to our existential validity, it's not something we ever have to earn or deserve. And so oftentimes when a person is, let's say, when it comes to any type of fortune, or, you know, particularly financial fortune, which has to, again, do with our being, our survival, and our sense of power and freedom, you know, we kind of can go into this space of like, oh, have I done enough to deserve existence? Have I done enough to deserve freedom? Have I done enough to deserve power? And so what ends up happening is we end up calling into question, you know, whether or not it's okay for us to exist, whether it's okay for us to take up space or not. And like I had said before toward the beginning of the video, is that whenever we have this sense that we might not be valid to exist, it like creates this kind of issue with money, because money is basically a sublimation of our deeper survival drives. So shame is something that goes, ooh, is it okay that I'm alive right now? Do I get to be alive right now? Who is it that deserves to be alive versus who doesn't deserve to be alive? And so with that being what shame is, it tends to extrapolate over into, oh, I don't deserve good things to happen to me. I don't deserve money. I don't deserve to have my basic needs met. I don't deserve to get what it is that I want. I don't deserve to get what it is that I need. And so when we're in this space, you know, it can create a lot of financial issues. And so a big part of this is to be able to actually resolve those deeper feelings of shame that exist underneath everything. So if we're calling into question our own sense of existential validity, we have to be willing and able to validate our own existence, not because we do this or we do that, or we're good at this, or we're attractive, or we're this or we're that, not for any of those reasons, but just simply because we are. We are valid because we exist. And so being able to, let's say, be forgiving of ourselves and our own shortcomings, and to be able to recognize the unshakable validity of our existence is what resolves that sense of shame underneath things, which again gives us the sense that we're allowed to exist, that we have a place here in the universe, that we get to take up space. And basically, we also want to get rid of any type of language or thought process that seems to throw that into question. So if you're a person who kind of tends to think in terms of, do I deserve this or do I not deserve this? You want to totally stop thinking about deserving at all or earning at all. There are limited contexts in which earning and deserving are, helpful. Like, it's okay, you want, let's say, the person to get promoted that's the best person for the job, within a particular context. But when it comes to your existential validity, there is no such thing as needing to earn your existential validity or being able to be relinquished of, let's say, your existential validity. So none of that is possible. So it's being able to be connected very deeply to your own right to be here. And right now, money is the way that you survive, and so basically when you have this sense that, oh, maybe I don't belong here, maybe I shouldn't be here, maybe my existence is invalid, then it makes sense that that's going to translate over into financial issues, because there is a belief, an underlying belief or an underlying question: do I really get to be here or don't I? And there's a particular archetype that you can get in touch with when it comes to this particular issue, which is the beloved archetype. The beloved archetype is the one that receives love unconditionally, the one that simply is. And so the beloved is not the beloved because the beloved is beautiful, or the beloved is smart, or the beloved is talented or has earned anything. The beloved is lovable simply because the beloved is. And so getting in touch with the beloved can be a great way, to, let's say, resolve issues of shame and to be able to feel okay with receiving things. And kind of going back to my point about Paris Hilton earlier, really my issue in my teen years, when I was judging Paris Hilton and saying, oh, she doesn't do anything and yet she has all this money. Well, ultimately that's an issue that I have with the beloved archetype. So being able to connect into my inner beloved, my inner Paris Hilton that just gets to exist and have money, or exist and, experience what it is that I want to experience. All of that judgment that I had before was just my own resistance to my own inner beloved. And so being able to conceptualize of yourself as somebody that needs to earn nothing in order to deserve good things is very important to open yourself up to receiving good things, including money. So basically, those are the 5 main shadow dynamics that I notice when it comes to people's relationship with money. That's by no means an exhaustive list. There are definitely other money shadows there as well, which I might talk about in future videos. But that's all I have for you for today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead, click the like button below and subscribe, and leave me a comment down below. Also, if you would like to learn about shadow work and how to integrate your shadow, I have a free shadow integration masterclass called the 6 Simple Steps to Shadow Integration, and you can go to shadowintegration.org/masterclass to watch it for free now. And anyway, that's all I have for you for now, and until next time, keep becoming more you.